Hello there. Today I wanted to go over a little tool that I built called Simple Vector Store, which is abbreviated as SVS, which I plan to use and which I built in order to sort of vectorize my database, my knowledge base, I should say. So essentially, I maintain an Obsidian knowledge base, as I'm sure many of you do, and I wanted a version of my knowledge base which essentially lets me perform semantic search. I want the benefits of a vector database which has all of my notes uploaded to it. But the current solutions weren't really working well for me. There are a lot of vector databases out there. I mean, there's Pinecone DB, and there are some open source options, and all of them are pretty good. The issue is that they're made for sort of an enterprise scale, and the tooling around them, like it's it in my opinion, in order to accomplish my purposes of basically implementing some sort of retrieval augmented generation system with my own knowledge base, I would have had to set up a fairly complex system compared to what I actually want to achieve. And so what I decided to do is just build kind of my own little Python script, my own little Python CLI, which handles that stuff for me. It essentially allows me to create a store and create a basically translate all of my notes into embeddings and store those on a vector database, and then perform semantic search on those embeddings. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I built here with Simple Vector Store, and I wanted to show you guys how to use it in order to vectorize and create like a little vectorized version of your own knowledge base. This could work for multiple things as well. I plan to add this to sort of like to have this work for code bases as well as other knowledge bases than just an Obsidian knowledge base. But the nice thing about the Obsidian knowledge base is that this entire thing is essentially a bunch of markdown files. Like if I go to my file on Junior GPT, this is a markdown file under the hood. It's all written in Markdown. It's extremely simple. It's just a big thing of text, and the text is formatted in such a way that allows certain styles to be implied and implicitly added, but it's still just a text file. And so essentially, it's very easy to search and to embed, and this would work as well for code. And so I'll probably add a code version of this, but right now I'm only really working with text and Markdown files. I digress. Basically, I wanted to take my Obsidian knowledge base and create a version of it which would be essentially vectorized. And today I'm going to show you guys how to do that, although I'm going to use a subset of my personal knowledge base. I'm just going to use this little writings for the sake of testing and just kind of demonstration. I don't need to show you guys the entire knowledge base vectorized because frankly it's going to take a little while to load, and so I just kind of want to use my writings subfolder. So what I've done is I've created a local clone of the project. So you can see that I've got my local clone, and if I do git remote v, then I can see that this is my Simple Vector Store repository, and I will put a link to this in the description. But the way that you use this is through the Python script. But first, I want to kind of go through a more general setup, and so I'm actually going to delete this. I'm not going to delete it just because I have some stuff set up, but assume that you clone it and then you change your directory to the directory of the Simple Vector Store. So now you're inside the Simple Vector Store main directory. Now, the way that you want to approach this, in my opinion, it's good to sort of separate concerns. So I like to do a virtual environment. So I do python -m v, and then I'm going to just name it svsenv. From what I understand, I'm not super knowledgeable about Python, but from what I understand, there are different ways of making virtual environments. I think you could use Anaconda, you could use virtualenv, you could use pyenv with virtualenv. There are like a bunch of different ways. This way is the way that works for me. It's a very simple way because I believe it's just built in. But essentially, we're going to use venv, and we're going to point it to a directory where it is going to build out the virtual environment. So I'll do that. Looks like it worked. I'm on Mac OS, by the way. Obviously, you guys can probably tell that. So the way that I'm going to activate the simple vector store is by sourcing the activate script. So I'm going to source the activate script. Now you can see I am inside of my svsenv. So now what I want to do is I want to do pip install -r requirements.txt. That's because there's this little requirements.txt file here in the root of the project, which should have been cloned down. So I'll do pip freeze, pip install -r requirements.txt. So now it'll do that. It's going to collect all that stuff. It should work. And there we go. So now that all worked. So now, theoretically, I should be able to do python main.py, and it tells me this is the entry point for the CLI. So essentially, I have two different main commands. I have store and I have stores. So store is for managing individual stores, and stores is for managing the stores as a whole. So essentially, think of a store as a single, as a representation of a certain directory. And that's kind of how these different stores are supposed to be separated. The thing that you are going to vectorize is a directory, some folder in your system, which in my case is the Obsidian vault. Every Obsidian vault, every knowledge base is probably going to exist inside of some sort of folder structure. That might not always be true, but this is essentially the version of things that we are creating this is essentially the structure that we are creating an embedding of. So we're taking the folder of your choice. In my case, it's my Obsidian knowledge base, or at least the subfolder inside of it. And every file in that is going to be embedded, and then it is going to be inserted into a database. Now, I should note that this is all based on SQLite VSS. So this isn't like, let's do SQLite VSS. Let's go search it up. This is based on this project right here, which essentially is an extension to add some vector features to SQLite. So this is all based on SQLite. So you can kind of think of it, in my mind, as kind of like, using SQLite. You want to use SQLite when you're kind of working on maybe a smaller scale project. You're working on something which you want to kind of be able to iterate quickly. SQLite has been that for a very long time. It's been the tool that people reach to when they need a database, but they want to make it simple and they want to make it effective, and everything is great, obviously, until you get into really, really high amounts of scale where bottlenecks really start to pop up. But SQLite works for my use case, and so everything in Simple Vector Store is built around SQLite, and SQLite VSS more specifically. So the way that this works is, first I want to add a store. I'm going to call my store writings. So the way that I do that is python main.py, and I'm going to do stores add, and then if I just press enter there, then it's going to tell me that I need a name. So I need to give it a name. I'm going to call it writings, because it's going to track all my writings in my knowledge base. So, So this is the other thing. I need to add a path to the writing. So basically, it is going to keep track of where is the location of those writings in the first place. So I'm going to do Python main.py stores add writings, that's the name, and then I need to give it the location. So I'm going to do me/notes/writings. So that's going to be the location. Now when I add that, it's saying it's going to add writings to store with the location, and then it gives me the location of my writings. So that's where it's going to be tracking and creating a representation. So now if I want to look at all the stores that I have, just to kind of confirm that that worked, I can do stores get, and there we go. We have stores get writings. And if I do, I'm not sure if this works, but I believe if I do names, then yeah, it's going to show me information about the writing store. Obviously it's not doing that at the moment, and that might be a bug that I should fix. But yeah, this is in early stages, by the way. So if anybody is using this and you notice bugs, feel free to leave an issue or something like that, and I will try to fix it if it's reproducible. So yeah, Python main.py stores get. So I've got writings here, and I want to create a vector representation of writings. Right now there isn't actually any data in my new writing store. I need to build that data. So that's what I do first. I do Python main.py store build. So now I'm using the store command instead of stores, and then build command, which if I just run that, it'll tell me that it needs the name. So I'm going to do build writings. So now it's saying it found 9 files to process, and now it's going to process all the files. So we'll wait for it to do that. Now it has processed all the files. So now if I do Python main.py store search writings, well, what should we search for? So the search command is essentially going to look through each of these. It'll look through all the files and it'll return things which are semantically similar, and it'll show us the distance of it. So I have a bunch of like random little projects, random little pieces of writing here. I'm not entirely sure what I should search for. Maybe let's talk about the birth of a project. This is a little writing I did about the life cycle of a development project. So I'm going to do search writings, and then the second argument is the query which I use. So let's do birth of a project, and now if I search for that, by default it is going to find 10 different things, and so that's why it brought up so many different results. It brought up, I think I believe it's 10. I don't feel like counting it right now though. But the first result is the life of the project, and then it just kind of goes down from there based on the distance. Now the formatting here is essentially like it's cutting everything off, and that's just because we don't want the entirety of every piece of content to show up for this results display. However, if you wanted to, you could do this in a little bit different of a way. So this search functionality, one of the nice things about this little project is that if I want to be able to access this search functionality, the semantically searchable version of my knowledge base, then I can use this server functionality. So there's a little server script, and it should work right off the bat. If I run python server.py, then yeah, there we go. So it's running on localhost 5432. I provided that port myself. You can actually, there are a couple of different environment variables here, which I should probably note in case you guys are noticing any issues. If I look at my env, I have an OpenAI API key in here. There's also the default file limit, and then the default delay request, and then the server port. All of these variables are available inside of the .env.example, and so you want to essentially go over and grab your .env.example file and copy it into a new .env file. The idea here is just that, and by the way, I'm going to reset my OpenAI API key after this demo, and so don't necessarily worry about this being exposed. It won't exist anymore once this is uploaded. But essentially, we have these different environment variables. The server port is what corresponds to the server, which starts over here. Now, if I go over to this URL, nothing's going to show up yet, but if I go to the endpoint, store, I think it's store. Let me check. If I just go to server.py. I need to make sure that this is at, okay, there's the URL. So yeah, stores slash name of the store slash search. So stores slash writings slash search. And then we need to give it a query. And we're going to give it a query of the birth of a project. And then we're going to give it a limit of 3. So just give me 3 files, which are the closest thing. So the first thing that it finds is the birth of the project, as stated before, or the life of the project writing. And it's going to find other things which are a little bit less relevant after that. Well, this is essentially how it works. And if you're interested in more sort of in-depth instructions, there is a getting set up aspect of the code base, which is going to be a little bit more thorough than I can be in this tutorial. But what I want to demonstrate here is that you can create a store, you can create a vectorized version of that store, and then you can very easily perform a semantic analysis based on OpenAI embeddings on your entire knowledge base. So I just did it on a very small number of files. I did it on my little 9-piece, my little my directory of 9 different little writings, and that's not a lot of data, so it's not particularly useful. However, if I did this on a large amount of data, then it would start to get a lot more useful. Plus, you have this little REST API. You can integrate this as a RAG technique into virtually anything. So say that I wanted to actually maybe ask a more specific question. Obviously, we're talking a more programmatic approach to this, but for me, I might be talking to a chatbot that I'm wanting to look at my notes when it is formulating its responses to me. So I can say, hey there, can you remind me about the birth of a project? And so maybe that's the prompt that a user is putting in, and then I say that's the query. This all pops up. This can be injected as context into the LLM's context window, like GPT-4 or GPT 3.5 or really anything. Then the inference will be informed based on this. And I mean, this is just retrieval augmented generation, so this isn't anything new. The idea is that this is a lot simpler to use. I only ran a few commands to actually do that. Plus, say I make a change over to one of my projects. Maybe let's go over to the mediocrity zone. And let's just say, hey, this is a change to my project. So in this particular case, now my notes are going to be out of sync with the rest of, with the embeddings version of that. The vectorized data store is going to be different in its representation than my notes. And actually, let's change this into something that's maybe a little bit more specific, and let's actually just add a new file entirely. Dogs eat men. Very random thought I just had. And then let's just say a bad dog will eat a person, whereas a good dog will love them. Likewise, a good person will kick or will love a dog, but a bad person will kick it. I don't know. Very strange thought. I don't have any particular reason for this for this language here, except that I want to have something very random, which is searchable, so that we can kind of prove that this can synchronize, and then we can also ask about this specific file. So right now, if I go over to this URL and I change the query parameter on this, and I say, what is a good dog? It has no idea what I'm talking about. It'll be like on the nature of humans and intelligent machines, the mediocrity zone, on alignment and beauty. It isn't synchronized. It's out of sync because I added that new file. Now, in a traditional vector database, something that I noticed is that as far as my own knowledge and limitations go, I don't know how to easily handle that synchronization. But with the SQLite version of this, every file is essentially represented in a normal relational database. So I can just run the synchronization logic against the normal SQL database and then have that synchronize with the vectorized version of that. So there's a sort of really nice middle ground between the two, and it acts as a sort of synchronization proxy. Now, what does that mean? That means that I can do python main.py store sync writings, and then when I do that, it'll say that it found one file to update and one file to add, and then it is going to add all the files that it needs to add, and then it is going to update the file that I updated. So I updated the mediocrity zone. I don't actually know that I did update I added this new line. So because I added this new line, it is going to pick up on that. Maybe that's something that can be fixed. But it synchronized that because I noticed that the change had been made. So now if I go over here and I refresh my request, what it's going to find is that the first result is the thing about the dogs. What is a good dog? It's going to know because of those embeddings. So this is the sort of really nice aspect of retrieval augmented generation that could be super useful, but also just semantic search is it's going to pull up the most relevant results. And the really cool thing is that this whole thing can inform a retrieval augmented generation, and also that this will synchronize automatically. You don't have to worry about once you have a store pointed at a certain location, you can just run sync on that store. It's going to detect all your changes, and then it'll just update automatically. It's not going to have to rebuild the entire thing before, as one of my earlier tools had to do. It's not going to have to rebuild the entire store every time you make an update to your knowledge base. So it's a lot more efficient in that regard. So this was kind of a throwaway note, so I'm just going to delete that. Now, if I want to come back over here and I want to see that change synced, let's hope it works. Yeah, I just deleted that file because it noticed that there was a file to delete. So that's the really nice thing about the synchronization. I think that that's kind of the main value add of this, is it's just like, one, it's simple, two, it's just incredibly nice to have that synchronization feature. So my writings is just always going to be up to date as long as I run that store sync. Now this is also supposed to be sort of a core to maybe a little bit nice, like more rich feature set. So like, for example, the server functionality, it's not particularly in-depth. You probably shouldn't put that just online or something, or everybody's going to be able to ping it. And it's a development server. So it's just kind of like, there are a lot of aspects of like that where maybe you want to build some more functionality around that. But the idea is that this is the core. With regards to maybe synchronization, maybe you don't want to manually run the synchronization logic every time. Perhaps we can put some sort of like watch, like event-based functionality in here, so that I can detect changes automatically and update in the background. Another thing I can see is just having it do it on a cron job or something like that. Either way, that might not be a specific part of the project itself. Like, it might not be within scope. I want to keep this very simple. I want to keep it very effective, and I want to make sure it's very reliable. So, once again, I'd like to reiterate that if anybody notices any bugs, please report them. I will happily try my best to fix them. I definitely want to say that it's possible that just because this is written in Python that it won't be as effective as perhaps something written as a standalone binary in terms of portability. I don't really like the idea of everybody having to, clone the repository and then they have to, like, yeah, it would be kind of nice. I'm thinking of like maybe a Go version of this at some point if people are interested. Maybe a Go version which can be compiled down to multiple different binaries, uh, so that everybody can just kind of download that and have it work from the command line right off the bat instead of, and having it be more of like a CLI application instead of just like a little Python script like this. I can see that being a thing, and if people are interested in that, like, definitely let me know. But I mean, this is just kind of like a really, really simple way to vectorize your knowledge base. Now, in order to actually do something with this, you're probably going to have to build up a little bit more of a system. You're going to have to make the call to the REST API. It's going to return a bunch of results. You're going to give that to the chatbot, etc. And I might make another little tutorial on how to do that. But at the same time, I'm not really interested in this being like a tutorial channel. So, yeah, that's how to do that. I'm not sure exactly if there's anything else that I should talk about here, but check out the project if it seems interesting to you. If it seems like it would actually be valuable to you, you can upload your entire knowledge base here. One last thing that I should probably talk about, which is also in the documentation, is that this is relying on the OpenAI embeddings API. Theoretically, we could use different embeddings, and I don't think it would be that difficult to, modify the code to either use a different embeddings by default or to use multiple different types of embeddings based on, your options. So, like, I could see different stores having their embeddings model, like, saved, and then, that given store uses a certain type of embedding every time that it is run, so that you can use, OpenAI embeddings for one store and then another type for another store, and then, so on and so forth. The only consideration with OpenAI embeddings is that there's a rate limit on the API, so you don't want to be uploading, like, massive amounts of files every time. So I could see that being a potential bottleneck. I could also see, giant files, like, in and of themselves being a potential bottleneck, since you have requests per minute type rate limits, you have requests per day limits, and you have tokens per day limits, from what I understand, or at least like tokens per minute, I think. And so, yeah, those are some considerations, especially, and there's also just the fact that this is using an API. It requires internet connection, and it also relies on a paid API. So OpenAI embeddings is pretty popular. That's why I decided to use it by default. But if you wanted to use another embeddings, I could see an argument for that, and I wouldn't be opposed to adding it if other people show interest. Sort of making it optional, making it so that you can add different types of embeddings by default. But yeah, like, I'm really just kind of looking for feedback with this. I'm hoping that it's helpful for people to have an ability to perform semantic search on their knowledge base and just kind of like have a little script that vectorizes their whole knowledge base. That's the really nice aspect of this. So let me know if this was helpful. Let me know if there are questions. I'd be happy to try to answer them, and I hope everybody has a really nice day.